All right, welcome to the Empire Never Ended Kino Club, a little cinema club we've decided to start here this summer, watching some movies.
Yeah, we're taking a little break from the heavy history and kind of looking back on some of the filmic representations of this era that we're talking about.
Filmic, you say?
But yeah, in doing so, we're going to be talking a little bit about Yugoslav partisan cinema. So we're kind of jumping ahead in the timeline and talking about shit that was made mostly in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, but about the Second World War.
Yeah.
I noticed that you stopped saying our names in the introduction.
Well, sometimes I forget them. Let me just fix that there.
Do you want to add that real quick?
Yeah, if those of you who don't know, this is I'm Fritz.
This is Boris.
Right. And also this is the Empire Never Ended podcast, I think we also didn't say.
Maybe. Maybe.
Goddamn, Fritz, you're slipping.
Well, I've been watching films all day.
He's been watching films with Fritzes in them, and that
yes,
often,
I have. I've been watching Fritzes get mowed
shot,
down all day. Yeah, one Fritz after another, blown up, shot, stabbed, strangled, neck broken. Yeah,
maybe we should have like longer introductions. And I noticed some of very popular podcasts have like it's amazing. They have like 3 introductions. I always think, okay, now they're starting to talk about the topic. No, it's another introduction. And like really, like usually 3 introductions per episode.
How many do we do so far?
We barely do one, I think.
Well,
usually.
People also like to hear like what people are doing and be like, "Oh, how are you, Ray? What are you doing?" And Ray's like, "Oh, I'm sick. I fell down the stairs and broke my leg."
Yeah,
and like, "Oh man, that sucks, man." And then
I guess or I don't know, be funny or something.
I think we're funny. No, maybe not.
Sorry, the cat stopped the internet somehow. I didn't hear any of that. So we're funny? Is that what we're deciding?
No, well, we were saying that some people like to hear like what the hosts are, how they are, who they are.
To feel better about their own lives?
I don't know. I guess that it's a way for the listeners to get used to you more and kind of listen to the podcast also for like that kind of thing. Not only the topic, like not to be super nerdy like we are, just to go straight into the bombarding people with information, but just I don't know.
Hey guys, you know anything about Yugoslav partisan cinema? Hey.
All right, so we're talking what kind of personal information, like
what are we doing or something? I don't know. I'm drinking beer.
I'm also drinking beer.
Yeah,
I'm drinking wine because we're talking about cinema, so I'm classing it up.
There you go.
Well,
I think that's 3 intros.
Yeah. I guess that's a good introduction.
Right there, yeah.
It's hot as fuck over here in the compounds. Yeah. Unfortunately, not all of us can be undersea dwellers like Dr. Salvador Falcon. Some of us have to live on land while the planet is burning. Apparently. This is hellish. Also, we have to close our windows and not have fans on so as to make the listening experience for you that much better. Mm-hmm. And we suffer in the process.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. I wonder if they'd even care. Why do we care?
I don't know. That's a good question.
Yeah. Should we just turn on the AC?
No, I think no, we shouldn't. Especially if all 3 of us do that, then it would be insane.
Yeah, well.
Fuck you, listeners.
So, partisan movies.
Yeah.
Boris suggested this as a topic, so I guess you should explain.
Most fun homework I've had yet this season, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it beats actually reading Ljotić. We like movies. I like movies specifically, but I think we all do. And
do you like partisan movies?
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty wide genre. I mean,
would you say it's a genre?
Yes, absolutely.
It starts to feel like one. Yeah.
Within a certain, I mean, it has been defined as a genre for sure, and not all films about partisans are partisan movies that are part of the genre, but it definitely exists as a genre.
And do you remember? Can you talk about what it makes a genre? Like why are there some movies about partisans not partisan movies in the sense of being part of the genre?
I mean, I think the ones that we traditionally understand as part of the genre are the kind of the bigger, higher production films, because they used also like the partisan, national liberation conflict war as a vehicle to talk about other things as well, but that weren't like part of this kind of major star-studded productions of films. But
so
I think before all that,
are only Yugoslav movies part of this genre, or is it?
Yes, I mean it's specifically like people also say that like Red Dawn was inspired by Yugoslav partisan films. Because it is essentially a partisan film that's anti-communist, but that is very similar to how like the partisan films are made. And we'll get to a little bit like how that genre developed. But when we were first doing this, I started like nerding out a little bit and seeing if there were any like fascist produced films. Since the era that we're talking about fascists, we're not focusing on the partisans in this arc really at all. I mean, we talk about them, but it's not a focus of the arc. So I started looking into
about assholes, exclusively.
Yeah, we talk about the assholes, and I was like, well, I wonder if any of them made movies. And that's a kind of interesting, complex story too, because the first sound film, I think, in Yugoslavia in general was made in 1943 in Belgrade. And it's a strange little film called Innocence Without Protection.
Okay.
And
that's what Makavejev later used for his
Yes,
movie.
exactly. And that's what's interesting about it is that like, so it was made in Nedic's Serbia and occupied Belgrade, but it doesn't really have any kind of political story at all. In fact, the story about it is kind of interesting in that the guys who made it were these like nerds, like tech nerds who were trying even before the war to like build their own technology for making like simultaneous recordings and for producing like sound films, talkies in Yugoslavia. And it just happened that they did this during that time period.
Also, like I if I remember correctly, I might be wrong. I think one of the first Serbian and Yugoslav filmmakers was this guy Stanislav Krakov that we mentioned in the episode about Ljotić, because he was his relative and later chief of propaganda for Ljotić's fascist party.
Yeah.
And he, I think, made a film called, I think, Voz Karađorđe. I think it was a film about Karađorđe, who we also talked about. Yeah.
Yeah, but that was a silent film, of course, made before the war. And that was, I think, one of the first, it was made in the Kingdom of Serbia. It was one of the first Serbian like dramatic films ever made. It's a weird movie. I mean, it's like kind of impressive that they made it in the first place because I mean, there weren't any films being made in the area at all. Yeah. It was like the only one. But I mean, like cinema definitely arrived here really early. Like the first projections in like the Yugoslav region happened like months after the first projections in like France. Because they were Yugoslav like merchants and shit that were like traveling back and forth and who got really into cinema pretty early. But
there was a connection with France quite close, I would say. Maybe.
Yeah,
a lot of influences coming from there.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, so yeah, fascists made a bunch of newsreels. They made some propaganda shit during the war. Nothing particularly interesting. On the Ustaša side, it's a little bit weirder because they had like their whole kind of cultural revolution going on. And they were very much against the cinema. They saw it as like a negative influence, primarily controlled by Jews and communists. And so they were like really against, they like shut down a lot of cinemas and stuff, but nevertheless, they also made like propaganda films, and they made at least one or two films. One was called Lisinski, about the famous composer Vatrsa Lisinski, which came out in 1944, which was also a problematic film for the Ustašas. There was some trouble with being made. I don't know. It didn't really exist until it was reissued, I think, in like 2008 or 9 or something. I haven't seen it, so I can't really comment on it. But yeah, so they weren't making a hell of a lot, which, we talked about why. It's kind of chaotic time to be making like, fiction films. But I mean, the communists got right to business when they won, which is in line with Lenin. Lenin had said that cinema was was the most important of the arts.
Yeah.
And in many ways, that's true when you're dealing with like a illiterate population. It's a really good way to communicate with people. And so they also got to work immediately. They established film studios in 1945. So Avala Film, which was one of the major like production house and studio complex, was established in 45, and then also other smaller production houses big production houses, other production houses in the other republics.
I think it was important to them because you can see also like a lot of these managers of these Yugoslav film productions were very kind of famous and high up communist and ex-partisans. I think they were like very much involved in that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, we'll get into also Tito's cinephilia.
Yeah,
good.
Because he was like a massive cinephile.
Yeah.
I mean, even more so than like Stalin, who was also a big cinephile.
Tito had a problem. He really
he
was
like
an
seriously,
addiction.
I think like screened
loved him
at
some
least
film.
1 or 2 movies every night. Every day.
Yeah.
Like he was really,
but
really
mostly like Western movies, right? Or
well, yes. He liked Hollywood films in particular, which Stalin did as well, but didn't let others watch it. So the first major post-war production was this film called Slavica. By Vyacheslav Africh. It came out in 1947, and you can tell it was made on a pretty minimal budget. I mean, from what I've read, they had very limited film stock. I mean, it was 1947.
I think they paid the actors in like food vouchers and stuff like this.
Yeah, probably. I mean, that being said, it's a pretty, it's an impressive little film.
Yeah.
But it's very much kind of in line with it's much more of a traditional like socialist realist film in that way, and it's a lot different from the rest of the partisan genre, but it can be kind of
adventure
understood
though, like the others are,
Yeah, but it can be understood as this kind of like predecessor to the genre because the film follows a woman who becomes in Dalmatia, who is in love with this fisherman, and together they, with their like local comrades and fishermen, get this boat that they give to the partisans to fight the Italians.
It's a pretty fun movie actually. It's almost at times kind of a comedy because also Slavica, her family is they own some factory or some shit, right? Like she comes from like a more wealthy background, and then she gives this up for this poor guy. But the capitalists in this film are hilarious. They're all like potbelly pig shaped guys with Hitler mustaches, like running around, stumbling over each other. It's great.
Yeah, but I mean, this is pretty typical like socialist realist cinema. I mean, that is like how they depict capitalists and all this kind of shit.
Very heroic on the one hand and very cartoonish on the other hand. It's a funny mix, this.
Right, because spoiler alert, she dies.
She always does, doesn't she? Like in all these films, she dies.
Yeah, a lot of people die. Most people die.
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
But, her comrades name this boat in her honor, and then that's kind of starts to be the partisan navy.
Yeah, right. It's like the first boat. It's awesome too. It's like a fishing boat that's strapped with like anti-aircraft weapons or some shit. It's pretty rad.
And there's some pretty memorable moments. There's some couple songs, right?
Yeah.
They're painting the boat and painting red stars on it and stuff and singing.
There's a great scene where, Slavica gets told a lot throughout the film, especially by her parents, that she shouldn't go off with these communists, she should be like a good woman and stuff like that and listen to her dad. And there's a great scene where they finally give her a gun, and it's so nice. Like, it's this wonderful look of this girl that's like, I've got a gun now, Dad.
Oh, yeah.
It's a good little moment.
Also, like this, Boris, you mentioned that the film was made by Vjekoslav Afrić. Yeah. He was like, of course, a partisan, and he was actually ahead of kind of the guy who, with some other people, during the war. He was running the partisan theater group, which was called actually it was called the Theater of People's Liberation, and it existed throughout the war. So I mean, that also shows how much partisans really cared about the arts. Even like in the worst of the times, they had a theater group.
Yeah. And correct me if I'm wrong too, but this wasn't Afrić also featured in, like, the first partisan film was actually a Russian film from Moscow, and it was and he, I believe, was tasked to play Draža in it. And
I was not aware of this.
The Yugoslavs really did not like anything about it. I think
I don't know. I didn't know that he was an actor.
But it was called like Partisan Mountain or some shit like that. It was a very generic title, and yeah.
I know, but I think it was a Russian film made after the war in Yugoslavia. It was kind of interesting. I forget now what was the name, but it's about how they're like hunting for Nazis who are hiding in the sewers and the underground of Belgrade.
Cool.
And,
shit! Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, throw that on the list. Yeah, so Slavica's an interesting film. Yeah,
but like I said, like I mentioned before, it kind of follows this typical socialist realist style, which was, I mean, the official style. And if you go back even into like Soviet film history, like, after the revolution, they had this kind of whole experimental phase, with all the, everybody knows Potemkin and Sergei Eisenstein, Giga Vertov, and
this is not that.
This is not that, but I mean, socialist realism was a break from that, and and so it was immensely popular when it happened in the Soviet Union, like when they first started making these non-weird experimental films like Chapayev and shit like that. But it eventually became very formulaic in the way that it worked, and was not particularly entertaining in much of the Stalin era. And I mean, part of that is that like all films had to meet like certain ideological criteria, and you can see that, for example, in Slavica, like there has to be some element of class conflict.
Oh, it's pronounced. Yeah.
And this is a very kind of typical like Stalin era formula for films.
Yeah.
And that would change really quickly in Yugoslav cinema, like almost immediately afterwards, right? So, because this movie comes out in 1947 and the Tito-Stalin break happens in 1948. And at that point, Yugoslavia becomes a big importer of American cinema, particularly Westerns, whatever, and the spin-off, like, Italian spaghetti Westerns, the whole bit, and it becomes an incredibly, the most popular genre of film, basically, in Yugoslavia, right? Yeah, so as Yugoslavia becomes a big importer of American movies, they also start to become a place to shoot movies on pretty low budget. So in the 50s, Tito opened up Yugoslav film studios to foreign partners and opened them up as like a cheap location, a cheap place to shoot films. And a lot of like Italian spaghetti westerns and stuff were actually filmed in Yugoslavia, not even in Italy. And then some American ones were as well. But kind of the main point for what we're going to talk about is that, I mean, that radically changed how people viewed cinema, and how, like, Tito, for example, who was, a raging cinephile, watched at least screened at least a movie a night for his entire reign, would come to view films, because, I mean, if you look at like American, I mean, everybody loved Hollywood films, right? Because they're entertaining, and they were remarkably effective propaganda films without being deliberately, like, without being so on the nose about it, right?
Yeah, deliberately, I mean, like, probably, but not like.
Oh no, deliberately, absolutely, no. but not obviously, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you could. I mean, it would be obvious if, because it's racist and and whatever, but like the average viewer was entertained by it and also internalized, the messages behind it. I mean, American World War II films were incredibly successful and popular at the time.
Yeah, usually in American movies, you don't have like a commissar character who gives like a very on the nose political speech or something like that.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. I mean, you kind of had that in wars, like in films made during the war.
Yeah. And cartoons as well.
And like,
sure.
with like the super racist Disney cartoons and shit. But I mean, the movies made after were just like entertainment films about the war, right? And weren't really heavy on like hammering in this ideological bullshit that like Soviet films were.
Yeah. It's more of like a wrestling match with the costumed good guys and the costumed bad guys kind of thing.
Yeah. And therefore were actually much more ideological.
Exactly.
In a sense, because they were like, their ideology was not recognized as ideology, which is the aim of every good ideology, I mean, so.
You're talking Bart, man.
Yes.
You nerd.
But traditionally, like socialist film, socialist cinema in general, not just even like old school socialist realism, but even in like later incarnations of it, were always against things like stardom. Like film stars existed in the Soviet Union, but not in the same way as they did in the U.S. They, or in the West, with is this kind of manifestation of like the American dream or whatever, an individual who doesn't really have any ideology, but is just famous for the sake of being famous and being a good guy or whatever, and people love him. That was usually frowned upon, and Tito kind of took that and flipped it around and basically said, well, why shouldn't we have a film industry that's like Hollywood, that produces Hollywood-like films, that that does all of that except with our own message. So, if Westerns are entertaining, but, it's reflecting this American narrative of conquering the West, which was rightfully by like the Soviets deemed as reactionary, and they banned Western films because they're just killing Indians and shit.
Yeah.
I was like, well, why can't we take aspects of that and incorporate it into our own kind of ideological system? And so
just maybe to before we go more into that, just to mention that it was not only American movies that became popular in Yugoslavia. So I think you mentioned in some of the previous episodes it was also Mexican films.
Yes.
I don't know exactly what period they became.
Mexican films was even before. I mean, that was even like the late 40s. And then right into right in the early 50s and stuff, right before. Well, I mean, when Mexican music became popular, Mexican films were popular as well. So yeah, like the 1950s, definitely had Mexican.
Mexican culture in general was very big in Yugoslavia. Music, especially, as you said, you had like Yugoslav musicians and bands even who exclusively played like Mexican music and stuff
mariachi.
Like that.
You can find it easily on YouTube. It's great.
And films were very popular, but then also all kinds, like also hipsters kind of got what they wanted in Yugoslavia. So like a bit later there was like French New Wave. Yugoslavia had all kinds of films.
Oh no, I mean, I think to kind of tackle Yugoslav cinema in general is a much bigger thing. I mean, because right now, I mean, we're not going to be talking about like the amazing like avant-garde films that were being made or any like the subversive films. We're talking here about like specifically like the commercial big budget
Nazi hamburger machine.
Yeah, which like I think has, more recently become a subject of interest again because it had become so kind of cliche and kitsch for like a long time that people were really interested in revisiting talking about Yugoslav black wave cinema and like some of the kind of subversive avant-garde films. But these are pretty
when you mentioned Nazis and I mentioned hipsters, just to say, for example, in 1971 there was like this the first of the like Belgrade film festival called Fest, and it was it was like a big thing, and for example the famous director Makavejev, who is like a more kind of underground and famous in the world director, he was the art director of the festival. Some Partisan, of course, Kader guy was the director of the festival, but still it was like you had like the stars of Easy Rider coming to Belgrade, and like what's the name of the guy from Apocalypse Now?
Marlon Brando?
Yeah.
No, from the Easy Rider main character with the
Dennis Hopper?
It's Dennis Hopper and Peter Fonda.
Yeah.
Giving some, but it was kind of like, and they were very popular, but also like they, like talking about hipsters, they also showed like a Leni Riefenstahl film at the festival, and I think it was one of the Nazi ones actually.
Damn.
So it was like, Macaveyev said something like, we are here just to defend of the right of every movie to be shown, something like this. So very kind of liberal stuff. So that also existed.
Yeah, I mean that's pretty emblematic of the attitude towards film. I mean there was a huge film industry, right? There was room for all kinds of different like filmmakers, to exist. I mean, a lot of them got in trouble and stuff for doing shit like that. But
they were also banned films. If they were too critical of Yugoslav society, and especially if they showed like class society in Yugoslavia, that shit couldn't fly really.
But when we're talking about like the big state endorsed like blockbusters, they kind of leaned really heavily into like the Hollywood thing. And so by like 1954, I think it was, is when they founded the Pula Film Festival, which was kind of the Yugoslav Oscars, or like, the Golden Palm or the Berlin, whatever. Yeah. But it's a really like red carpet film festival that's held inside of like former Roman Colosseum in the city of Pula, on the coast, on the Croatian coast. And that became kind of the center for like officially recognizing films, and kind of, the Yugoslav equivalent to like the Oscars or whatever. And so by like 1962, I think Kozara is maybe like where we can start defining the partisan genre, like in the big budget sense. And that's the first commercial film of this guy Veljko Bulajic, who's kind of the most important of the like film directors of partisan films. I mean, there are other very important ones, but he kind of
he's the usually.
I mean, he directed some of the biggest ones. Surprisingly, he did like sci-fi and shit before that.
Cool.
But they weren't like very commercially successful. He was a partisan from Montenegro, and then after the war went to Italy and like also studied with like Fellini and shit. And like studied in Italy. I think a bunch of his family were killed by the Italians, so it's kind of interesting. Sent to Italy to study film.
It's interesting you say he did sci-fi, because he did the Battle of Neretva as well, and when I watched that, rewatched it again, I kind of I was reminded of Star Wars and how.
Thank you for saying that.
Yes,
how rebels are portrayed in Star Wars.
Yeah, I immediately started looking for George Lucas partisan films, and I didn't find anything. I didn't look that hard, but like I've and not just that too. But when we start talking about Walter, right? The Nazis depicted in that, the offices that they're depicted in look so much like Death Star conference rooms.
So I have heard like conspiracy theory kind of like film chatter that George Lucas had seen some of these films.
It really feels like it. I mean, Star Wars feels like partisan films for royalists.
Yeah.
So Chetnik films.
Yeah, but I mean, a lot of these films were also drew a lot from like big budget American World War II films that nobody remembers now, but that were like really immensely popular at the time. You like the early 60s, you had tons of films about World War II that just like none of us, know about anymore. Whatever, they're just not.
I could see George Lucas being into that. So.
Which one of the Star Wars movies starts with the rebels in the snow planet? That's Empire.
That's Empire Strikes
Back.
That kind of reminded me of Neretva. Reminded me of that.
I was having the exact same thought, Ray. Exactly the same thought when I was watching that.
Yeah. I mean, and Neretva precedes it by like
a fair bit.
A fair bit. But like Kozara is like his first like major film, and it's one of these early. They established some of the stars that you would see throughout Partisan Cinema, specifically Velimir Bata Živojinović, Ljubiša Samardžić, Milena Dravić, and like other actors that would kind of come to embody the entire genre.
Yeah.
And in some ways, like even became memeified and like caricatures of themselves, you know, where when they start to take on like more action roles. But in these, like in this film, for example, is when you see like the extent of like state involvement in production.
Oh yeah,
because and this will be especially true in Neretva, because you see when they start like using soldiers as extras, and like staging these elaborate battle scenes.
Yeah,
with, like,
it's real as fuck. It's like
very
impressive and very, very real.
Yeah, and so the kind of creme de la creme of Partisan's films, which we've mentioned now a few times, is definitely then the Battle of Neretva.
Yeah.
Which came out in 1962 and was intended to be the blockbuster, right? I mean, people were still not sure what the budget was for it. I think it was like a guarded state secret for a while or something.
Sure.
But people have said that it was maybe one of the like largest budget non-American films.
Well,
like
the story usually
films.
is that it was like the only film that didn't have a budget. Like in the sense, anything they needed,
they could do whatever
it.
they wanted. Yeah.
And they clearly did. And it's great.
And in keeping with like, you know, Tito's kind of like pimp dandy.
So you made a mistake. Just it was in 69, not 62.
Kozara was in 62. I'm sorry. Yes. Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. Neretva. Should we go back into that?
Whatever you want.
Or you can correct me. It's fine.
Yeah. Should I correct you again? Or
do you like it? Do you want me to do it again?
Correct me, Ray. Correct me.
Or you can just.
Well, actually,
maybe you can just Fritz. Maybe you can just put a funny dub it like when he says 62.
I'll just put your voice on that,
or your voice like 69.
1969.
That sounds dirty now.
Yeah. Okay.
Let's just change Wikipedia to make it say 62.
Yes.
It's a lot easier.
So by the time Neretva was made, I mean, Tito had already been courting all these like Hollywood stars to like this really ridiculous extent. You know, they'd been constantly invited to like these film festivals, and were like really welcomed lavishly.
And to his place, yeah.
And to his to his main villa on the island of Brioni, which is like where he took like heads of state. When Khrushchev ended the Soviet Yugoslav thaw, they were there. And then he was also just like entertaining like Hollywood celebrities, like A-list celebrities at the time, like popping bottles and, you know, driving around on this like ridiculous little car. And
he especially liked Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor. I think they were his favorites.
Well, Richard Burton played him in Sutjeska, which is something that I guess has been talked about in partisan cinema, that no real historical figures are really represented except for Tito, and I think only in a couple films.
But also
Sutjeska also has Savo Kovacevic.
But in terms of like being the main characters of films, it, like for example, Neretva.
Sure, I know what you're saying.
Neretva, for example, is like a major film in which the main characters are not actual historical figures. Right? They're like.
Except like Yul Brynner's character is called Vlado, and he's apparently like inspired by some actual Vlado.
But
Yul Brynner plays it.
They're all inspired by somebody, but they eventually like people have said that this is because they didn't want to fuck with Tito's like thing going on. But I'm not actually sure that that's necessarily the truth. I think ideologically it makes sense to kind of have films, if you're already dealing with like film stars, to not have them necessarily represent historical figures, but represent like an actual common person, right? Or like a common partisan or something like that. A real hero, even though he's like a celebrated star outside of like the world of the film.
Yeah, so Yul Brynner is one of the stars of Neretva, but also
Neretva, I mean, is really like it was the endless budget film, the bottomless budget film, but that had literally, I mean, they got pretty much anybody they could get at the time. Mostly, I mean, okay, so some of them were washed up at this point, but not all of them. So let's go through the cast and crew. So Sergei Bondarchuk, who's a very famous Soviet actor and director, was cast in this film. So this is interesting, right? I mean, it's an international cast completely, and it's mind-bogglingly so in some ways, right? Because we're talking about like, a major Soviet film figure, Yul Brynner, of course.
I don't have typhus. I'm only carrying out orders.
Bata Živojinović, who's Yugoslav film star, Franco Nero, who is a major spaghetti western Italian film actor, Orson Welles, who at this point was deep in his like really like morbid Leo Beast alcohol phase.
Good for Chetnik, yeah.
Chetnik,
but perfect for the role that he plays, which is a fat ass drunk Chetnik.
But a fancy Chetnik.
He wears like a tie all the time, and they call him a senator.
Yeah.
So he's like apparently some kind of a senator, which is kind of strange, but okay.
Maybe it was aspirational.
Yeah.
He's like a politician, like a representative of the royalist government in exile in London.
Yeah.
But also an ally of the Germans.
With the aid of our German allies and the Italians, we will deal the death blow to these jackals, these so-called partisans.
Yes. Anthony Dawson is in it as well. Then it's also produced by a Hollywood, one of the producers is a Hollywood producer. There's a famous German guy. I don't know German actors. Kurt Jürgens, who I think appears in a couple partisan films, is kind of the main
partisan
German.
Films have great Germans. Like,
well, this is the interesting thing for it, right? I mean, I wanted to talk about this because it's interesting how they represent the enemy, right?
Yes.
So maybe we should just quickly, now that we've established that it has this star-studded cast for 1969, this is like a pretty big deal. Pablo Picasso did the promotional posters for it, which I think maybe was one of the only like promotional material he ever did.
Damn.
So I mean, and then at the opening of the film, Sophia Loren was there with Tito and Omar Sharif. Like it's a lot of like really important 1960s classic Hollywood film stars took part in this and took part in the opening, and it was this massive spectacle. They recruited something like an entire battalion of the Yugoslav People's Army soldiers to take part in it, which was like, I guess it took long enough to film that it was several like generations of recruits, people serving their army, their mandatory military service as being, extras in a film.
Sweet.
One of the stories about this film, about its budget, is that they built a bridge just to blow it up, and then they used like a model in the end anyway. And
they built it.
Was that a model in the end?
Oh.
Yeah, because they blew it up twice. They built it, blew it up.
Good model.
There was too much debris and smoke to get a clear shot, so they rebuilt it and blew it up again and had the same problem, and then did it on a soundstage in Prague.
Okay. All right. Word.
But the bridge is still there. You can visit it. It's in I think Jablanica in Bosnia.
I mean, the wreckage is still there. You mean?
Yeah,
the blown up wreckage.
The blown up bridge that they used in the film is still there.
Yeah.
People can go visit it. It's definitely still there. And from what I understand, they spent, and it shows in the movie too, just endless amounts of military hardware that they destroy.
Constantly throwing them into the river, blowing them up,
like
them on
pushing
fire.
tanks into the Neretva River.
So many horses. There are so many horses in this movie.
I don't know if the horses were harmed in the making of the movie.
I have some questions about shit. I can remember the name. Sutjeska.
Mm-hmm.
I swear to God, a dog gets shot in that.
I was also thinking about it. I think it wasn't, but I don't know.
I don't know. This isn't Cannibal Holocaust. They weren't doing
I know, but it's
animal
it's an
cruelty
amazing effect. If not, it's an amazing effect if it's not.
Yeah, I mean they had some pretty state of the art guys
strapping little miniature explosives to dogs.
So I mean, yeah, Neretva's this incredible production. It's an epic fucking film. So the Serbo-Croatian cut of it, well, I think all non-American cuts of it are nearly 3 hours long.
Yeah.
Ray just informed us that he watched the English one.
Yes. That's an hour and 45 minutes.
Right.
Yeah. Significantly short.
Yeah.
So, Fritz, you think they cut out the communism out of it, or what?
That's what I thought they had to go through and edit all the communism out. And I was thinking that, there are times when they say that, they're fighting for, and then you have a voice cut in that says, a perfectly fine liberal democracy. And then it gets back into it.
No, it's just, I think they didn't add anything, they just cut stuff, I guess.
Although, you know what, like, throughout these films, there isn't maybe that much. I mean, there's stuff that would be objectionable to like an American audience, but they always praise all of the Allies.
Oh yeah, they're very nice.
They always say, "Long live the Soviet Union, England, and America," and
which is realistic. I mean, that's what I did.
Yeah. That's what they did. Yeah, I mean, they always flew the Soviet flag, the American flag, the Yugoslav, and British flags and shit.
Like the anti-Deutsch.
Exactly. So what did you think? What did you think of of Neretva? I mean, Fritz, it was your first time watching it now?
It was my first I think it was my first Partisan film that I've ever seen, actually, was that one. I'm thinking about it. I think that's true.
It's a good place to start.
Yeah. I mean, I'm looking at my notes on it here that I took, and I just passed one that says, Empire Strikes Back is this movie. So there you go. We were on the same page there. But I mean, apart from just like being kind of astounded at the reality of the military aspect of it, just how much actual equipment and weaponry is out there just getting blown up all the time. I don't know, I have to say it was a really good movie, and I recommend it. There's in the opening of this film, I was struck by this kind of, I don't think there's any spoilers here because it's like really at the beginning, but in this very kind of Hoth defense, Star Wars kind of thing going on. Unlike Star Wars, they spend a lot of time on normal soldiers in the front lines, like really getting a sense of who they are and like who they love and blah, blah, blah. And there's like a death, like right off the bat, of somebody you don't even really know, but they make you feel for it. It's a very effective movie in that way. And I was thinking, like, what does this remind me of? And I could only come up with the movie Executive Decision with Kurt Russell and Steven Seagal. When, there's this like big buildup at the beginning, and Steven Seagal, who you expect to be like the star of the film, is just taken out, like right at the beginning.
We're not gonna make it! You are!
I felt like that was the closest approximation I could come up with.
Yeah, there's a lot of ordinary soldiers, and most of them die.
Yeah, really. Yeah, and you get to know them, and they fucking die. Yeah.
Well, because we should back this up and say that the film is based on the actual Battle of Neretva, which is in Yugoslav lore, and I mean it's known as the Battle for the Wounded or whatever, right? The film opens with a quote from Tito, which says that this was like the most humane battle in like the history of man or something, because it was the situation in which the partisans were in this impossible situation, and they were stuck with all these civilians and refugees, wounded people, and were had to break out of the German lines who had encircled them and save all these civilians. So I mean, it was a particularly brutal affair, but one that kind of proved that the partisans were really truly on the side of the people, right? Because they were fighting for, they came out of this battle there to protect the civilians that they were with.
Yeah, I also kind of was now rewatching and get impressed by how much they insist on portraying like the horrors of the war. So like you have these surgeries done without any kind of anesthetics, and just thousands of wounded people horribly and so on, but also like people who are like traumatized by war.
Yes.
There is a few characters in the film who like kind of at times lose all sense of reality, or like you are like visibly very traumatized.
But this is also partially because typhus is kind of a theme throughout, eating up everybody's brains. So you get a lot of this like very personal dementia. It's really effective, I think, in this way. It doesn't present like the strength doesn't come from the same thing that an American film would show you. Like the strength isn't in this like badass fighting force kind of thing that you do kind of get involved there later. But in this one, it's like it's very much portrayed as like I hate to be so corny, but it's like a humanitarian struggle against these like very dark forces.
Yeah, and like persistence of like ordinary people against all odds.
Yes. Which is why I think singing becomes a very important part of these films too, doesn't it? Because it kind of shows like an indomitable spirit, and all these films have like songs. They're practically musicals,
they have a lot of music.
Really.
Yeah, some of them are actually almost like completely musicals. I mean, we can maybe talk about some of those other examples later, but yeah, music plays a big part in Neretva in particular, right? I mean, from the very beginning, has this kind of leading marching music, but then towards the end, there's that brutal like sad sequence of all these people erupting into song.
Yeah. Preparing to be slaughtered by Ustasha. Yeah, it's fucking good. I love how they portray Chetniks in this film. They're very funny. They are just portrayed as like dangerous and absurd, which I think is something we can get behind. And you see them like being herded like sheep by their commanders, like being sent in one direction and then back in another one and then back in another one. And then each time they go like, ah! Like every time, turn around, go the other way. Rah! Constantly so enthusiastic until they eventually start shooting each other because, whatever, some of them are betraying the other one and blah, blah, blah. Some of them want to lie down.
They are the orcs.
They're absolutely the orcs.
Partisans are hobbits, yeah.
They are absolutely the barbarians, yeah.
I mean, it's an interesting film because I think they portray almost every side, right, in the war.
Yeah.
Because they have the Italians are in this film.
Yes.
The Germans, obviously.
Yeah.
Chetniks and Ustasha. I mean, there's a portrayal of all of them, which usually in some of the films they focus on one or the other, whatever. This one's kind of the whole thing. It's got the
and it's interesting that the Italian is the one who deserts and becomes a partisan.
There's a very handsome Italian deserter. In fact, anytime someone's handsome, you know that they're a communist, more or less, at least in their hearts, an anti-fascist.
That's not true, though, because the Germans, the way the Germans, I mean, in general, in all these partisan films, come off as like, I mean, they're all like super immaculately clean, stylish.
They're clean, but they're not like ruggedly handsome. Like these guys, like what's the dude's name who plays Walter? That guy's got a mug. That's a mug. Yes. Yeah.
I mean, he's the main star of like all partisan films.
And a lot of the Germans I've noticed are like very much Indiana Jones Germans, like old guys with round glasses screeching about this or that. Except for in Neretva, there's this like, what's his name, Kellner, this like commander out there who has this. He's like, he's a handsome guy, and so is his little friend. The little Robin to his Batman, this blonde German kid that follows him around, who they're just clearly in love. And it's like hinted at throughout the whole film. And like he calls his name when he's not around. And it's very, I don't know, it's a weird, don't know how I felt about it. Like it was
like a homoerotic.
It was kind of it was satirizing homoeroticism.
Wait, who's in love with whom?
The Kellner is like, I think the implication is very strong that Kellner and his whatever first officer are doing it. And,
I think this is
a lot
some sort of
maybe
lot
that
of
was cut
hints.
from the English language version.
I mean, this is also some like there was a lot of like homophobia that associated fascists with like homosexuality for sure. I wouldn't be surprised if this is
I guess it
kind of
serves
representation of that.
Do you think it kind of is there? If it is there, do you think it's kind of there to drive home this idea that they are somehow like
if you saw it, it's kind of there.
An urban alien, kind of like a high class urban. I don't know.
Well, I guess it's some kind of a Stalinist or...
This would be a Stalinist interpretation of homosexuality for sure.
It would be it's a bourgeois degeneracy. So.
Yeah, it's exactly how I think.
Or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Because it is these higher class Germans that tend to, in this case anyway, that showed it.
Well, I mean, for Yugoslavs, all Germans are higher class, I guess.
For Germans too.
And I mean, this is how they're kind of consistently represented in these films, and Neretva was a good example of this. They're kind of represented as... First of all, almost all the dialogue in all these films that have Germans is done in German. And I think that was done like very deliberately. I mean, it's this kind of association with the German language with this, with the occupier. And, everybody then knows like Partisan and, Banditen, all these like, German terms for partisans and whatever. But, they're always shown as like in having everything, right? They have this like immense power and then always being confounded by the fact that these like nobody people kick their ass.
That's like in Star Wars.
It's like a consistent theme. Yeah, but like, exactly. It is a lot like the Empire in that sense. They're just constantly being like, what's going on? We should be kicking their ass. Why are we, how are these people getting one over on us? Should we move on from Neretva? Have we covered Neretva? Should we talk about?
We can come back maybe later if we compare films or something.
Yeah, let's go to.
I mean, I guess what I was trying to say is that I feel like Neretva did a lot to kind of establish these official images of the enemy in like the cultural narrative in a lot of ways, right? Like, I mean, these are the Germans. This is what they're like.
Yeah.
Chetniks are like shitheads that can't get their shit together. Led by drunk ass Orson Welles.
Right. Yeah. And I think they do a good
Italians are bad, but like some of them are okay.
They're bad, but not committed. Yeah.
Yeah, they're bad, but like, they're kind of like buffoonishly not good.
Well, I mean, it wasn't so
inaccurate.
overtly. Like they could do it much worse if they wanted. They're not like Italians are not really portrayed as some clowns or something. Like
Well,
that.
I mean,
no.
I mean, but they do have feathered caps.
Well, I mean that's
what's
their
real.
sense of style.
I mean, you're not. Yeah, it's hard to portray somebody as a clown when they're walking around like that. I'll say this though. Maybe I got the sense in Neretva, in particular, that because of how they portrayed the Germans as this upper class, very civilized, in kind of imperialistic culture, compared with these, let's say, Chetniks, on the other hand, presented in this very savage, barbaric way. They're confused sheep running around. They need to be herded, this kind of thing.
With knives.
Yeah, well, yes. And then in the middle, and by the way, like Germans riding around on mechanized vehicles, Chetniks riding around almost exclusively on horses, and then partisans
horses really factor heavily.
Horses are
into the
huge in
Chetniks.
this
They're
film.
like in cavalry. Like,
Absolutely. It's mass, tons of horses. You won't
it's kind of
believe
showing
the
them
horses.
as like this archaic form. Like, they're all
exactly
like,
and the
doing
partisans
cavalry charges.
Partisans have both. They've got horses and they've got mechanization, and they're also neither like the high class cultured civilization, nor are they this like ultra nationalist barbarian. There's something else, and I think this is kind of how, I don't know, they do a good job of drawing out a category that I think a lot of American viewers of World War II films would probably not be familiar with. I think it's something that is unique about it.
Well, American World War II films are all about like the camaraderie of guys. I mean, all American films are about
buddy
like,
films.
the camaraderie of guys sent somewhere where they've never been before, as opposed to like,
and that America lives in the hearts between these people that can get along no matter what.
People being in like their home territory, getting like fucked up by foreigners,
Yeah,
which is why like Red Dawn is
partisans like characters are both men and women, and also there are children and very old people, and so it's kind of portrayed as the whole. They're not really all soldiers. They are soldiers because they have to be.
They're fighters.
They're just they're fighters, but portrayed as like the society, ordinary people who are now in this situation.
Yeah.
And constantly, I mean, you never forget this. You're constantly shown pictures of people's faces, just one after the other, of different religions. Like which one has the warrior priest in it? That's
Sutjeska.
Yeah.
Sutjeska,
Sutjeska has the guy with the cross and the machine gun, saying, "These are my prayers," as he shoots a bunch of Nazis.
I mean, they're pretty on the nose with that aspect of it, right? I mean, because Neretva opens with this sequence of like partisans marching through this village with like there's a band going and like the soldiers are marching, and then this guy gives a proclamation in which he goes like, Serbs, Croats, Muslims, Macedonians, Montenegrins, Slovenians, blah blah blah, like we're all fighting for against the fascist occupier or whatever. So it's pretty on the nose with that, and representation in like who. Like the names of characters in these films is also pretty important, and sometimes not necessarily reflective of the actual battles that they're talking about, but like are sometimes done in the interest to create this narrative.
Every film needs a stipe.
Pushing. Well, I mean, there's some interesting films, for example, like Kapetan Leshi or whatever, which is a partisan film that deals with Albanians, which has this kind of very romanticized view of Albanians, and there are about Albanian partisans and stuff, and there are Albanian actors in it. Of course, the whole film's in Serbo-Croatian, and
I think mostly actors from Albanians from Yugoslavia, right? Not from. I think.
Yeah. Of course, yeah.
Gender is also super interesting in this in the Neretva film. Like, there's a lot of stuff that I think people could be pretty excited about even today. Like, it's.
Yeah, I mean, it's weird. What's the name of the Danica? Is the female character, kind of maybe the main female character, I would say.
Yeah.
She is like, I don't know, is she a nurse or?
It's unclear. I think they kind of assume she has that role.
Constantly screams her name.
You're right about that.
And but it's kind of like I didn't have the picture that she's actually a nurse.
No, I think she was a straight up soldier. That they just assumed she knew how to sew. Yeah, that's true. But there's also the cool actress who like Molotovs a tank and then takes one in like the face or something. And I thought that was just straight up. That was good stuff. And a lot of, by the way, like women helping women, where there are scenes where women are in trouble in a military capacity, fighting the enemy, and are saved by other women, and it's not a big deal.
Yeah, I mean, there's even, I think, a whole subgenre of partisan films that deal with women as well. And there was a later one called Azra, which is about like. I mean, this was, I think, made in the 80s, and it's about like a Muslim woman who rises in the ranks in the partisans and becomes like a major or something, and then at the end of the war goes back to her home village and realizes that like that the patriarchy is very much still in place there. And there's an interesting sequence in that film of her giving a speech to a bunch of women in niqabs and then having them take off their niqabs.
Oh, damn. Okay.
And and then like denouncing like because all the other like members of religious communities are there as well, but it's all these women in niqabs. There's like a Orthodox and Catholic priests there as well. And
yeah.
She talks about how they're backwards and like how it's a symbol of male oppression or whatever, and then they all like ceremoniously take off their niqabs and start like dancing to like a partisan song or something.
Wow. All right.
But that's one of like several films which kind of focuses on that issue. That's a much later one, of course, that with the 80s.
So I guess we're moving now to Sutjeska. In the Battle of Sutjeska, a few characters right at the beginning, they refer to the Battle of Neretva. Like, they mention the names of people who died during the Battle of Neretva or how they were part of that and so on. So somehow, almost deliberately, they want to make some connection, I guess, not only with the historical event, but also with the film, I would say.
Yeah.
Although, I mean, it's not a direct sequel because you have same actors playing different characters, but I think in a way it is, I would say.
It's a spiritual sequel for sure. I mean, it's even more or less about the same thing, like the sick and wounded.
It's a historical sequel also because the Battle of Sutjeska occurred also in the same year, but later.
Right.
Also in Bosnia.
It's also like the most ambitious partisan film with Neretva, right?
In terms of like the resources put into it. Now, like this one doesn't have the same. Well, not to like maybe an American audience, the same star-studded cast, but it does have some of the same people, right? What's his name? Is Sergei Bondarchuk's also in it as well, right?
I noticed that he I think he maybe did something in the production, maybe like wrote something or something. I didn't notice him in the film. Is he in the film? No.
He might not be.
Wies and Walter are both in the film.
Yeah.
Yeah,
most actors from Neretva, like the main ones, are there. And also Richard Barton is the star of this one.
Yeah, notably Richard Barton plays Tito.
No.
Which I guess Tito personally selected him to do this.
100%,
and had like invited him beforehand, like, to wine and dine him in Yugoslavia. There's this
take him in the car.
Very funny picture of him and Tito like in front of a stuffed bear. It's very strange. There's a lot of strange pictures of Tito with the stars. And this picture of Richard Barton and Tito with this bear is one of them.
I mean, it's a strange kind of the character of Tito portrayed by Richard Barton is kind of strange in the film, I would say. I mean, I definitely prefer Neretva over Sutjeska.
I do too.
Yeah, me too.
I mean, not to say Sutjeska isn't like an impressive film because it is. It's got a lot of stuff going for it.
Yeah, but it's much more melodramatic, I would say.
It is.
And I think you noticed when we talked about it, you think, Fritz, that it's because Tito is a character?
I think they had to clean up the house, Make it,
it's
nice
a strange character because they didn't want to portray him as like superhuman, so it's not so overt. But it's also he's kind of a super rational person, always very calm.
Doesn't give you much.
No,
doesn't give you much emotionally or character wise.
They portray that he has emotions, but it's mostly he's just very
kind of like he says he has emotions.
Yeah,
but he gets like whatever he's got. His arm gets all shot up or something, or takes some shrapnel, and he just yells at people.
He's like, he's very calm, I would say. He yells, but not. He's a super fatherly.
Yeah, he's
figure.
like the composed commander.
That's true.
I mean,
unless he's talking to a nurse, in which case he lost his temper, I think, 2 or 3 times, a little bit. Not bad for a guy who took shrapnel to the arm and is, commanding us ever decreasing army against the ultimate evil. But he did get a little feisty.
But usually because she's this character who's like very she always wants to sacrifice herself for the greater good and doesn't care so much about herself, and he's like, oh, stop fucking around, you need that vaccine and you're gonna get it. So it's kind of true. So historically we know that Tito really was he had a bunch of lovers when he was in the partisans, and always had a female companion with him, and a few of them during the war. That's definitely not portrayed in the film.
No. Don't people say that he was also schmanging with Sophia Loren?
Oh yeah.
I mean, they say that obviously, but I don't know if it's true.
Maybe Tito said
she spent a month in his private whatever villa or whatever.
God, that's.
I mean,
30
I'm
movies.
sure he tried, but
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean anything that she was there for that long. I think there could have been the perfect gentleman about it. But yeah, I mean, he had a bunch of children. Like,
oh yeah,
he had
I think he had 4 different marriages or something. I don't know.
Well, he had like 2 kids in Russia, I think, when he was POW there, and afterwards, and then he had kids left and right.
Well, probably mostly left though.
Huh? I don't know. Yeah, I guess. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess none of his kids went like right wing.
Well, I don't know. Do you count National Bolshevik as right wing?
Yes.
Wait, which one of them's a Nazpol? Well, the Yoshka or
Yoshka,
yeah. He's kind of Nazpol.
Well, then you still said it right. You said left and right, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
that's a grandson, actually, but yeah.
Oh, yeah, there's a grandson. Yeah, that doesn't fucking count. Yeah, I mean, Sutjeska is definitely an impressive film, but it's lackluster compared to Neretva. When you look at those 2 films together, Neretva definitely takes the cake.
Yeah,
absolutely. There's some fantastic shots though in
I mean,
like really good stuff, but like as far as the drama goes, it's very
emotionally. It's also not satisfying.
It's flatter. It's much flatter.
I don't know what the fuck was the point of like. There's this like main. So the relationship between 2 partisans who are like married, I guess.
Yes, I know what you're talking about. Yeah, it's handsome dude. It's Walter
and Mileva Drajic, and they're like very. I don't know if that was deliberate, but they're kind of very distant to each other.
Quite cold. Yeah,
kiss each other on the cheek, and then she's dying in the end with this horrible death, and she has surgery, and they cut her arm off.
And he's not even in there. Like she's holding the hand of some other dude.
Then he goes to see her. And then she dies, and he says nothing like at all, and he's like, "Oh, okay, she's dead," and he goes away. And I don't know, like,
I mean, I think that's officially because I mean, this goes down to like what some of the policies were for actual like guerrillas and stuff, which is that romantic relationships weren't encouraged at all, and in many cases could be punishable, depending on the commander.
But I mean, she just died. I mean, in front of him.
No, but what I'm saying is that like in real life, this was like not encouraged. In films, they would often kind of, I mean, they would make these kind of romantic engagements and stuff between people, and later on in some of these other films, this would become more pronounced. But I feel like Sutjeska seems to like kind of struggle to really like stay on the line politically, right? Both in like how they portray Tito and then like how they portray like love between comrades and like
I see.
Shit
so
like
they are
that.
keeping a clean house.
But it's also very strange. I don't know, because it's not. I don't believe this is like, from my experience, this is not really how Yugoslavs behave most of the time.
No, but this is why. But this one has Tito in it, and so it has to like kind of reflect this.
So because he's like this super rational machine, everyone else has to be in the movie because he would seem even more like a freak in.
I mean, that's my take. I might be wrong, but that's what it seems like to me at least. And that's why I think it's a less effective film than Neretva, because Neretva has so much more to work with the characters, right? It's not like shackled to like Tito. And
Neretva also has like a bunch of like pretty funny jokes kind of mixed into it. Like there's a lot of focus on keeping the spirit up, and that's what makes it so tragic and like good, Like one guy I remember, somebody says like they're carrying some dude who's missing a leg in Neretva. And they're complaining, like, oh my God, I wish you had both legs. And the guy responds, if I had both legs, I'd be heavier, which is a great joke. Yeah. It's great.
There's also like, I think in Sutjeska, the funniest one was when one partisan says to the other, it like looked like we were going to be captured or something like this. So I had a plan. I will like shoot you first and then myself. And the other guy says, well, like next time when you have these ideas, like just shoot yourself and like, I'll be fine. I'll take care of myself.
Yes.
Yeah. So actually humor is, is a consistent part of partisan films.
Yeah,
and has been like written about as like a feature of these films, which is very different from like most kind of World War II or
absolutely
war films.
Yeah,
it carries on into like post Yugoslav cinema as well, like dark humor and stuff. But it's definitely a feature, like you said, like it's a way of kind of like humanizing the situation, right?
Even in the worst of situations too, like under heavy fire in Neretva, one guy offers a can of food to another guy to get him to leave cover as a joke. Like that's good.
Yeah, but Sutjeska is less so, I would say. And there is also this scene, I think also a married couple or a couple or something like this. He is wounded and they're resting, and children are also there. They're all sleeping like next to a rock, like in a sitting position. And then he's wounded, and I guess he thinks he's dying, and he is a burden. He says he wakes up I guess his wife, and he says, "Listen, I'm going to the forest. It was enough of this. I'm a burden for everyone," meaning I'm going to go and shoot myself in the forest. And she's like, "Oh, has it really come to this?" And he's like, "Yep, it has." And he goes into the forest, and she like continues to sleep.
Yeah, she goes back to sleep. Yeah.
What the fuck is this? This is weird.
Yeah, it really was.
I don't know. Like, I'm not sure exactly what the point of such a scene is. Like, okay, it's tragic. I get it, and it's hard, but still, I don't know. It's weird.
A lot of like, you know what? Maybe it was supposed to be something about how death just becomes like mundane at this point. Everybody's dying like this. You know, we watch a bunch of kids. Well, at least a kid get shot in this film. I mean, it's it's a rough film, like in some ways. So I don't know. Maybe that was the idea, but it was a little weird. Yup. Not even goodbye. Just
and
like
then she goes back to sleep.
Yes.
I mean, I get it. Like they're exhausted, and I don't know. Maybe this is realistic.
Maybe
like,
maybe that was a real story.
Yeah.
And
but
I don't know.
It kind of seems weird. I don't know.
Yeah.
So Sutjeska, second place.
Yeah.
The Neretva,
Definitely. Yeah. I think Tito is the problem, the biggest problem, and
everybody was nervous. Yeah.
Yeah, you just had to keep the line a little bit more. So now we're jumping straight into Walter Defends Sarajevo, right?
Yeah.
Which is a film that we've mentioned before on this, on the show.
And use the clip from it,
Yeah.
In a very weird way.
Well, I was trying to capture the spirit of our show and the spirit of Walter Brani Sarajevo when I think I succeeded in that completely.
Yeah, I think this is literally the only time anybody had ever made the link that we made. I can say that with utmost confidence that nobody has linked Walter Defends Sarajevo to the Order of Nine Angles.
Yeah.
So.
That makes you feel more confident?
Cheers to us for doing that, whatever that means.
Yeah, I mean, that just shows how, like, deranged we become from all of this shit, yeah. I mean, we're linking everything that we do with the Order of Nine Angles now.
Yeah.
Yeah, our brains are...
Or James Mason,
yeah, even worse in some ways. But this is a fun one.
Walter is, that's a wacky, fun adventure.
So this is a 1972 film directed by Hajrudin Krvavac and starring, of course, some of the characters that we've seen before. So Bata Živinović, a big star of Partisan Cinema, Ljubiša Samardžić.
Both of them were in all three films so far.
Yes. Ljubiša Samardžić is also a band. Punk bands, kind of in the same way that Charles Bronson was like a hardcore band in the US.
Yeah.
There's a band from Zagreb called Ljubiša Samardžić. Just a fun punk fact for anybody that keeps track of that kind of thing. But this one, so this one kind of is definitive of the genre in a way that, like, this is where the genre got to a point in which it started to get kind of absurd, but in a fun way. This is like an action film, more than anything else. And the story follows this illegal partisan leader named Walter, who's operating in Sarajevo, and the Germans are trying to figure out who he is.
Yeah, that's his nom de guerre.
Yes,
it's partisan name.
Yes,
which apparently
is based off of a real guy.
Name. Wasn't it
one of Tito's names? But there was also this guy Vladimir Peric, who was actually active in Sarajevo, whose nom de guerre was Walter. But again, with these films, they don't necessarily base it on one specific case.
Yeah, sure.
Deliberately so. But this film has a lot of fun stuff in it.
Well, hold on. Doesn't it start out with who they call Lajny Walter, the fake Walter?
Yes.
Yeah, it's a very like good, fun espionage film and counterintelligence film. That's I think mostly what it is, really.
Yeah, it's also beautifully shot.
Oh, yeah.
in Sarajevo. In Sarajevo, like it takes full advantage of like the vistas of the city and like the weird narrow alleyways and like
it's great. The geography is super important.
Courtyards and mosques, like it plays a very big role in the film, and it kind of explains why it was such a cult film to that city as well,
of course.
Because it came to kind of represent the city of Sarajevo in a film sense.
I mean, at some point, the Yugoslav started making those kind of partisan like productions, not only films but also like I guess the show Otpisani is kind of similar.
Yeah, this is what I wanted to link this to Otpisani, because I think this is the point in which the genre kind of exhausts itself from like the big production to like just pure entertainment, right?
Right.
Which is like we know the genre conventions. We know that like, okay, it's the Germans. The Germans are like this. The domestic traitors are like this. The snitches, the this, the that.
Yeah, they're all archetypes. Yeah.
Yeah, the archetypes have been established, and now it's just like
Let's play
some fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's a lot of that in this film.
Not only like tragic partisan stories, but also like some badasses who are partisans.
I mean, yeah, and there are.
This is a badass film. This is a film about badasses.
Yeah.
Badass buddies.
Yeah.
Who just slaughter Nazis in really fun, creative ways with a lot of trickery and yeah.
I mean, there are still like some tragic moments, and there's like some like weird shit in there. Like, there's that scene where like they confront that woman who is snitching.
Yes.
To the Germans, and like Ljubiša Samardžić like smacks the shit out of her.
Yes.
And it's like really kind of an uncomfortable scene.
Yeah, it is.
Because he's like slapping this woman.
Like as he's practically crying too at the same time. It's a very
and then she's like, you don't know what they do to us.
Yes.
Like the Germans, like you don't know like what they're and it becomes all of a sudden this like really like serious fucking scene.
Yeah, it is.
Not only because like it starts off with like him like beating this woman, and then her just being like no, but like they're doing like unimaginable shit to us.
And the actress, by the way, is fantastic. Like it's a really
plays
compelling,
it
really well
really
acted
well.
scene, and like you go from like a wacky plot unfolding to like this truly dark yeah.
It's an incredibly like, dark scene, and then
It's a roller coaster.
he kind of is like, yeah, I guess so. They are doing that. What's your highlight, Fritz, of this?
I mean, look, I mean, going from like battle for the Neretva, battle on the Neretva, through Sutjeska. Sorry, I can remember the fucking name. Sutjeska, right?
Sutjeska.
yeah. To this, even from like Slavica, which is if anything, that's kind of one of the wackier ones that we talked about a bit. But like going from all of that to like dudes fighting on top of a train, with like the classic. The tunnel comes and the bonk of the Nazi's helmet on the tunnel, all that shit. It's so wacky. And then to cut to that, to like the scene of this like woman getting beaten and sobbing about how the Nazis are going to kill her and shit, like, or a mass execution.
Because there's a massacre of like, civilians.
But it's
as well.
as like a spy versus spy kind of movie. It's fantastic. It's really fun. A lot of cool plots. Good stuff.
Yeah, because I mean, like the urban guerrilla thing, and this is what will like carry on in Thought Be Sunny, for example, is like true badassery. Right?
Yeah,
because
right.
it's like it's one thing to like be out in like in a partisan in the woods, like suffering, like not having nothing to eat, and like the urban guerrilla things, like just way more about being a badass because they're like sabotaging, like in disguise in the city, like.
Yes.
Like shooting a motherfucker, like they're doing.
Yeah,
like
you know what I finally noticed too when watching Walter was something that all these partisan films do, and I'm so happy that they do it. Is that they, how like in films when you're like pick up the gun, pick up the guy's gun. You know, they always pick up the gun. Yes, it's fantastic. It's so fulfilling.
That's a big thing in partisan lore is that they didn't have any guns.
Yeah,
right. And so you pick up the gun of the dude that dies in front of you.
Oh, they're always fucking upgrading. It's awesome. It's awesome.
I think because
but that was a real thing.
Yeah, totally. You have to. It makes perfect sense. Yeah.
Because in all of these productions, actual partisans were involved, so they probably wouldn't allow for them to not pick up the gun.
No, some dude's yelling at them in the corner, pick up the fucking gun. I can't believe how many like Hollywood films ignore that basic fucking thing. And it tells you a lot also, I think, about maybe how war is depicted maybe in these sorts of war films coming out of Hollywood where the dude doesn't pick up the gun. Like, you kind of don't need it in a Hollywood film because you also have all that plot armor working for you. You're not in any danger, really. The audience always knows you're not in any danger, and you're going to figure it out somehow. But in these partisan films, everybody's getting fucking killed. Like, you get attached to a guy and he's dead a minute later,
Although, I mean, this film really...
This film does have plot armor. It's plot
armor has
powered.
One of the most, like, emblematic, like, slaughter of Germans by one man.
Yes.
That, like, it's fucking hilarious.
It's awesome.
So, in one sequence, the Walter characters at like the top of this, Ottoman clock tower in like the old city of Sarajevo, and there's all these Germans, and they're like engaging in battle with his comrades down there, and he's like up there with like a heavy machine gun, just mowing them down.
Yeah,
dozens of them are just falling to the ground. Fucking...
While his two best friends are like jumping around the rooftops, like shooting down the other half, and like they're all having a great time.
Yeah, it's straight up action movie shit. It's awesome, and this became like kind of one of the more laughed about genre conventions of partisan films. Is like it eventually gets more and more ridiculous. Of like the Germans just like falling dead, or like the enemies just like falling gunfire. Bunch of people fall down.
Yeah, pretty Star Wars too in that way.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, like the stormtroopers can never shoot straight.
Yeah, exactly. The rebels always win, and it's that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, as Boris said, this film is like very important for like Sarajevo popular culture and like local identity, I would say. In the like this area of popular culture, like this film together with a few bands and like I don't know, one TV show or something like this is some of these things that are like always somehow connected to Sarajevo and also used in other media and culture that came from that place even to this day. And also, but when you have something as popular as that, then you of course you have capitalism using it in all kinds of ways. So like it's weird because the guy portraying Walter, called Bata Živinović, that we mentioned a few times, he became a very popular actor in China.
Yes.
And there is even a brand of beer there that has him on the what do you call it, on the bottle as Walter, and the beer is called Walter.
Whoa.
So this is actually there's a very important reason for that, which is that China, after China had made a break with the Soviet Union and then later became more and more isolated, even when they had established relations with the U.S., they weren't importing U.S. popular culture like Yugoslavia was. They were still maintaining this like ideological line, and although like throughout this period of time they did have relations with Yugoslavia, and so like the best popular culture that they were importing was coming from Yugoslavia. And so like Yugoslav films in the 80s, in the 70s and 80s in China were fucking really big because it was like, first of all, the only like foreign films that they were getting. I mean, what other countries they have relations with, like fucking North Korea and Albania and shit? Like
North Korea's got films?
Have you ever watched North Korean films?
I haven't.
I have. Oh man, it's great. I mean, it's like even more of a caricature of like the worst kind of socialist realist films. It's like,
and they had their own American actors.
The couples are like together and they're like, what would Kim Il Sung say now? And it's like, Jesus Christ. But yeah, so like Yugoslav films became immensely popular, and fucking Walter Defends Sarajevo was like one of the most popular films in China.
他要精明就不带你来干这个，他一定知道我很了不起。跟他说过吗？对不起，我忘了说了，我自己跟他说吧。
Which ironically made this guy Batashi Winich, as Ray mentioned, one of the most recognizable film stars in the world if you're going by like per capita
number of fantastic
number of fans.
Yeah, good for him.
Especially among the older generation. I mean, there's like all kinds of like videos that like people have done since then of like going to China and like interviewing people and be like, do you know about Yugoslavia? And they'll be like, yeah, Walter.
How do they feel about all the Chinese jokes in Sutjeska? Like,
I don't think they watch Sutjeska. They like Walter. They like Batashi.
He's in it.
They like the action films. I mean, because like, yeah, I guess. Wait, what Chinese jokes?
At one point, they're like shooting a bunch of Germans, and the guy that's kind of rough who dies picking flowers. That guy, he yells something like, "Look how many of them! It's like they're Chinese or something." And then before that, there's like a Chinese joke that I guess he's already told, and the guy doesn't want to hear it again. And then later, something about Chinese people and horses. There's like three of them in there.
They probably just dubbed that differently in China. They said, look how many of them, it's like they're Japanese or something.
Ah, right, yes.
That's probably why they love Walter. Because of that joke about the Japanese.
No, that's in Sutjeska, but yeah. Yes, maybe.
Yeah, but the Walter thing was definitely a big thing in China. I'd be curious if we ever have a listener that is from China and has any memory of this. That would be
it'd be fun to hear some perspective.
And there is also in the Yugoslav region there is a kind of fast food chain called Walter, also because of this film.
Yeah, in Serbia, but
what do they serve, like cevap?
Yeah, they do like Sarajevo style food. I mean, it's made by people. But all over Sarajevo, there's Walter shit. Walter in the Olympics. That's like the two, like and
sure.
like Toplist and Adrealist
and there are songs by newer bands inspired by the film.
Yeah.
What can you say, I guess, in general about historicity in these films? Like how I mean, maybe excluding Walter, but beyond that.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, the ones about like specific battles are relatively accurate to a certain degree, right? I mean, these battles actually happened. This stuff with the wounded people, and those were all real things. The stuff with the blowing up the bridge was a real thing too that happened. Like all that shit was real. Of course, like certain things are embellished in the characters that are made in the films, right? The characters are there to like to drive home a particular ideological thing, and
what about, for instance, Slavica? Like this, because this is.
Slavica's a lot more cut and dry. I mean, that's a very simple film in some ways, right? I mean, they're all like Dalmatian people. There's a class dynamic between the two characters, but then like they're just fighting the occupier.
But I mean, like, is the boat? Was this real? Like, is this true? Is this accepted?
Oh yeah, I mean, sure. There was to a certain degree like and this became a thing later, like of embellishment. With the partisans, like the partisan Air Force thing became like a big thing. I mean, it did exist, but it wasn't like it was in the films. But the shit with like the Navy, like on the Dalmatian coast, that was pretty real. I mean, in the sense that like people were using like fishing boats to like smuggle people back and forth to, attack Italians and Germans and shit like that. I mean, I think that's pretty historically accurate. Like when you get up to like the shit like, Walter or Otpisani or something like that starts to get like into the territory of pure fantasy. But
that gets to some Indiana Jones territory.
I mean, I think, without going into too much details about specific historical events, and of course they're like portrayed in these films like in a very kind of often in an unrealistic way or not true to actual events completely. But just if you think about like a structure of stories and that people tell to each other for thousands of years, and then you look at the situation of the Second World War in Yugoslavia, partisans are really the only one who could be called the good guys. And like even like if you like with all the criticism that you might have, and I certainly have of the Communist Party, and also like a total rejection of many of things that they did, and the actual critiques of the partisans themselves and so on. Basically, I mean, they are like, if you want to tell a story about that, they are obviously the only ones who could be the good guys in a film or anything really. Like even when there were attempts of like these revisionists in the recent years to make films or TV shows with the other side as the good guy, like for example the Chetniks, and it doesn't work. Like there is no story there. Like there's nothing there. Like you cannot. There was
trivia.
There was an attempt of like having like a Chetnik TV show in Serbia, and it totally it bombed totally. No one liked it. Like Chetniks didn't like it because I mean, why would you? Like, what's the story there? Like the story is like they are supposedly like this guerrilla movement, and then they decide, okay, maybe we shouldn't really fight the Germans. It's very dangerous, and like maybe we should just wait for the Allies to come, and in the meantime we can fight the communists because they are the big. Like this is not a great story. Like if you want for your heroes, like so they portray them like you can either portray them as like people who like slaughter people, which is what they did, or like just this like they portray the Chetnik leader as this kind of almost like depressed kind of guy sitting in a forest and like an intellectual kind of thinking about life or something. Like this is boring shit. No one wants to. Like Chetniks don't want to watch that.
Sure. They want blood.
I mean, in some ways, like Chetniks were even more like satisfied with their depiction in some of these partisan films
specifically.
In Neretva specifically.
Seriously,
they were because they're like charging and like
that's so
like
funny
all this
to
shit.
me because part of me was like, I really wonder though if this is just how they are, and to hear that they watched this like baying of sheep going up and down hills and
but I mean this is often true. I mean like people often identify
some
people like watch Full Metal Jacket and are like the drill instructor is the man.
Yeah, but that's like, that's like also because dude. like those watch like okay, American History X or whatever, et cetera, romper stuff. Yeah, Nazis fine, love them. But those guys are all like cool. The Chetniks and Neretva are not cool. Like
this is
really
as much as cool as they can be.
Oof,
it's
that's
certainly
bad.
Cooler than they were because they at least portrayed as dangerous and kind of badasses. Like they look like a dangerous force on their horses and stuff like this. So
they have a cool fucking flag with skull and crossbones and shit. Like they look like it's kind of badass.
I guess
it's better than
not the vibe I got.
It's better than like just slaughtering civilians or just sitting in a forest and waiting for the Allies to come while collaborating.
Sure. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. They gave most of that to the Ustasha in that film.
Yeah, the Ustasha don't really come across as...
They seem about right.
They don't do much. Yeah.
They just kill innocent people in the forest, and then later one guy gets hit in the head and starts eating snow, as I remember, and that's the most you hear about them for a while. I think they sing a song, though. They have a little song at some point. About Pavlich, I think, of course.
There were actually like a whole series of films that dealt like seriously with the Ustasha and Jasenovac and shit like that. But those are kind of not part of this like big budget spectacle films.
Okay. And how many films is Tito actually portrayed in? Is this his only one? This Sutjeska?
No. There are a few. But Sutjeska was, I think, intended to be like the big one.
Okay.
Right.
Mm-hmm. It's very Tito focused.
Yeah. He appears in, I mean, he's represented in one of the early films. Like one of the, like right after Kozara, I think, is, what's it called? Raid on Dervar.
Okay.
That's the Otto Scorzeni action. where he where he failed totally.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, this is a film by Fadil Hodzic, and I believe Tito's represented in that one as well, because that's actually in the real historical events where he got wounded. And almost died when the Germans were trying to take him out. But yeah, no, he doesn't factor. I mean, not at least in like most of these films. I guess since we already mentioned that we think that Star Wars and Red Dawn definitely are influenced by partisan films. Red Dawn for sure, but I think George Lucas is a thief too.
Well, John Milius and Lucas are very good friends. I mean, John Milius, who did Red Dawn.
Yeah.
They're like very good friends.
God, wouldn't it be fucked up if they watched partisan films together and one of them went on to make Red Dawn and the other one made like a royalist partisan film? The fuck, guys.
Well, I mean, royalist, it's kind of... because
that's true. We don't really know if Leia's parents...
They also fight for the Republic, so it's...
it's a Republican film. That's true. Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah, okay. But do we know... What were Leia's parents' politics? Do we know that?
Well, I mean,
I think
her mother is the boring person from the prequels, so...
I never watched the fucking... I watched the prequels, but I don't remember.
I'd rather take a book.
She's a Democrat.
Okay. All right. But she's a queen. So she's a...
Yeah, it's stupid.
Parliament.
Yeah, it's George Lucas' stupid ideas. But she's like... I guess it's some kind of a constitutional monarchy, and she's very much for democracy and stuff like this. She basically... She has a sentence when they give these superpowers to Palpatine before he becomes the Emperor. He becomes I don't know, a special kind of chancellor.
Yeah, he's a fancy senator. Yeah.
Then there is a big applause in their space senate, and she says, "Oh, so this is how democracy dies, with thunderous applause, something like this." I don't know exactly, but she's an American Democrat.
I see.
Like a wimp.
And that's what they're fighting for.
That's actually a good place to end. Although I was going to mention Force 10 from Navarone since...
later, right? Aren't we going to do that
No,
later?
I was going to give a hint that maybe our next film episodes are going to deal with kind of Western representations of World War II and Yugoslavia. Because there were some...
Just a few films,
there's
a few films that deal with that.
And one was made during the war.
Yeah, the one that's pro Chetnik. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's what we're gonna get to in our next film episode, which will be sometime
in the future.
In the future, we don't know.
All right, guys.
If this episode sucks, then maybe we won't do it at all.
Yeah, we'll just talk about Star Wars. I'm fine with that.
Let's talk about Star Wars. Yeah, we can do that.
Okay, well.
Yeah. Since Walter set the stage for like the badass urban guerrilla genre of film,
partisan film,
partisan film, Yugoslav partisan film, since that's what we're talking about.
Yes.
I think it's only logical for us to jump into The Written Off, or Otpisani, which was an incredibly popular series, which also dealt with this kind of absurd situations of these urban guerrillas in Belgrade, and which had a hilariously 1970s, almost Shaft-like funk intro music.
Great. That
is just completely like emblematic of what this whole genre is. Like when you sum it up from Neretva, like, this heroic stuff, to like Shaft.
Yeah. Do you know what?
So like the Yugoslav version of Shaft. I mean, this is kind of the spectrum of this genre.
There's this weird moment in Sutjeska where they're ascending the hill to meet the Germans on this like peak that they're going to take, and like it's just this terrible fighting, and it's where Sava gets shot and all of that. But there's a moment where it switches from like a sort of triumphant classical film music to like disco for like 30 seconds or something while everybody's shooting each other. It's fucking crazy. So all right. So let's hear this song, huh?
Yeah, let's go into it.
All right, I'm gonna have DJ Hot Content
and
cue it up.
And end the episode, I guess.
Oh, okay. Well then, goodbye.
Yeah. See you guys later.
Ciao.